Greetings and salutations, everyone. You're listening to Mama Rue's Ancestral Musings. This is a podcast about all things Blackness with an ancestral point of view. I hope everybody's doing well. If you are in Chicago or, the suburbs of Chicago, Indiana, and Wisconsin, please be careful out in this heat. The temperatures are getting up to deadly. This may be, normal for other folks elsewhere, but for us, it gets pretty deadly for our people who are vulnerable, such as our elders. We had a horrible situation in 1995 where we had, really high heats and several people lost their lives, mainly elders, and we don't want a repeat of that, okay? So go online and check out the Cook County listing of cooling centers and check in on your people. If you've got elders, neighbors, family members who don't have access to fans and air conditioning and things like that, water, ice, whatever, check on your people. Make sure that they are well cared for. If you've got to pick them up and take them somewhere else, please do so, okay? Because we don't want a repeat of 1995 here in Chicago. So for today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing a book, A Secret History of Memphis Hoodoo by Tony Kail. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. Tony, if you're listening, if I'm pronouncing it wrong, I'm sorry. It's spelled K-A-I-L. Okay, K-A-I-L. And you guys heard me on my last episode. I said I would not be reviewing books on this show that I could not get behind. All right? Listen, this book, it has got to be one of the best books I have read on this topic. Okay? The best. Because when you're reading about your people, writers who can write in a way that actually brings them to life to the point where they're jumping off the page, okay? It just doesn't get any better than that. And this is one of the reasons why I was really, really behind, Michelle E. Lee's book, Working the Roots, because she did the same thing. Okay, now, of course, they both utilize some of the same techniques with their researching methods, which was interviews, okay? Really good, deep, in-depth interviews. But even with the characterizations of those that have long transitioned, who are included amongst what I call our hoodoo saints, he brings them to life. And so that lets me know that the author really gave a damn about doing this and doing it right, okay? It's such a blessing. It really, really is to see the care and the respect was included in this work, all right? And if, like I said, you can be outside of Black culture and be passionate about something in somebody else's culture to the point where you basically immerse yourself in it. You do the due diligence, you do the work, you spend the time, you spend the money even to make sure that you're covering it. And not only that, you are being respectful with your presentation. And I just have to say, this gets my seal of approval. It's very respectful, very thorough, very in-depth, very well done, okay? So yes, I highly, 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 highly recommend this book if you are interested in learning about your people. And who are your people? Hoodoo, all right? That's something that we established in the previous episode. So if you're just now listening to Mama Rue's Ancestral Musings and you don't know what that means, or it sounds a little funny, or you're confused, please listen to my previous episodes. It's a two-parter in which I break down who we are as a people, all right, and everything that went with that. All right, so I'm going to just read right now the list of chapters, okay, that are in the book, just to give you an idea of how the author kind of goes with the flow of this. So the first chapter is Diaspora. Okay, listen, that's where he had me. All right, you know how they say you had me at hello? That's where he had me with this book. What I loved about this book, how he opens it up, man, he just totally set the stage and the tone for the rest of the book. And what he did was, and I'm not going to read it word for word, all right, but what he did was this. He set up an opening of 2 scenarios, okay? And this just kind of speaks to, you know, what I talk about on this podcast, when I talk about the ancestors, when I talk about us, and I try to make the parallels or show you evidence of the continuum. What he did was just great. He started out giving you a scenario of a doctor in Africa, okay, let's say Congo, and a person from the village comes to them with an ailment, and they're saying, you've got to help, this is an emergency, you know. And so he goes on to describe what this doctor or shaman or priest or nganga, if we're really going to be proper with it, what the nganga would actually do to help this person from his village. And he identified each of the different steps, okay? And then there was some sort of, witness phenomena going on, and the villager got scared and they're like, what's going on? And the doctor says, or the Nganga says, they've arrived. And they're like, who? And he says, the ancestors. And then it's finished. So then he gives you the second scenario where you're, in the 1940s Memphis, and a person from the neighborhood comes running into the little shop, Dr. So-and-so, I got this going on. I got that going on. What can you do to help? And so he goes on to, kind of do the similar movements that the Nganga did in the Congo. Okay, the items are different, right? But the movements are the same. And he basically fixes up, this little thing for this person. And then he starts to call down the spirit, and there's some witness phenomena. And the client is like, whoa, what just happened? And the root doctor goes, well, they have arrived. And they're like, who? And he says, the ancestor. And he ends it like that. And I said, shut my mouth wide open. Child, listen. I knew it was going to be a good book from get, okay? From that part right there. And I'm like, finally, somebody gets it. Finally, somebody really understands what's really going on here, instead of going along with the perverted notions about our people and our culture and our spiritual tradition, trying to dictate to us, right, what it is and what it ain't. We got somebody that was like, nah, I ain't with them shits. I'm just going to go over here and do it the right way. All right. And that's why it can, man. Yeah. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a good book. So that's the first chapter, Diaspora, where he makes the connection between West and West Central African spiritual and religious tradition and practices to the practices of hoodoo. And what is hoodoo? Basically us, right? But we're talking about the spiritual part, right? The root working, the root doctoring, and the conjuring. All right. Now, one of the things that I didn't like about the book is he didn't really go hard enough at distinguishing those 3 parts of hoodoo culture, because they are different. All right. And I can understand how, one would kind of mix them all up and whatever. But what I did like about what the author did was kind of give some credibility or validation to the fact that a lot of Black folks in the South use hoodoo and voodoo interchangeably. All right, now this is something that I've spoken of, because there are a lot of people I see online who are outsiders or whatever, or they're getting their information from outsiders, and they're so like gung-ho about saying hoodoo and voodoo are 2 separate things. They are not the same. VOODOO, voodoo as it is known in the United States of America, is absolutely not the same as Haitian voodoo. It is not the same as the voodoo that is practiced in Benin, okay, or Ghana, all right? So let's make that very clear. But when you're talking about the voodoo that is practiced in the United States, the similarities between so-called voodoo and hoodoo, you're just talking about a region, all right? A region. All right. That's it. Because folks in New Orleans still call what they did hoodoo too. All right. So that's where the confusion comes in. People are focusing too much on what folks outside our culture are saying. And they're like, oh, well, they must be right, and they give legitimacy to this stuff. But if you grew up hearing voodoo and hoodoo in your head, in your ear, you know that they're talking about the same damn thing. Now, are there distinct cultural differences? If a person from New Orleans is talking about voodoo, the voodoo that they grew up with in their family, the voodoo that they are doing because this is part of their community, yes, it's going to be different from the, quote, hoodoo that I'm talking about with folks in Mississippi, okay? Particularly from the Delta regions of Mississippi. So, yeah, there are going to be regional differences. But voodoo and hoodoo, because of the fact that those words are used interchangeably by a large group of Black folks, and they're basically talking about the same thing, that's the part that a lot of outsiders don't want to get. And I'm just so grateful that this author made it, kind of clear that, yes, these are basically the same things. And yes, as far as his focus, Memphis style hoodoo, they were, all right? They were used interchangeably. So that's where we get into the second chapter. Hoodoo Culture. It does a great job of kind of stringing all the bits and pieces of this culture, okay, into a really smooth narrative, all right? He illustrates it in a very smooth way. He doesn't go so far as to say this is basically Black culture, but he kind of does, okay? He actually does. But you just have to read it, It's not as explicit as what you've heard me say. I'll just put it like that. But it's very, very clear that he understands the truth, about this practice, this tradition, this culture. He's not just parroting the bullshit that everybody else keeps parroting, all right, which is, it's just a system of folk magic with European and native influences. Now, while he does make that statement, I think I saw it one time, he still, like others, can't really back that up. He does include a quote from a self-identified Native American, but it didn't really legitimize that statement. All they did was make a statement about hoodoo pertaining to Black people. It didn't have anything to do with, oh, here is how we contributed to it. Here is how my tribe contributed to this, And like I said before, the contributions of Native Americans in hoodoo tend to stay within the realm of root doctoring. And like I said, if you want to read some great firsthand accounts about that, check out Working the Roots by Michelle E. Lee. All right? But when it comes to the sorcery aspect or the magic aspect or the spiritual parts, right, the Native American part isn't there, all right? I still have yet to see the receipts for it. I keep getting all these anecdotes from people talking about people who are no longer here to say whether or not what they're saying is true. That's not going to be enough evidence for me. I'm still looking. But until I have it, for now, I can safely say that the practice of hoodoo, except for root doctoring, does not have any Native American elements. All right? Because I've already debunked the myth. People like to say, oh, well, the little medicine bag, the mojo bag, I already debunked that one. Y'all got to come harder. All right? But getting back to this review, that chapter was just a breath of fresh air. Hoodoo culture. He highlights the melange of our music, right? Talking about our folk music, our blues music. Okay, there was a nice little part about Bill Street. Little part. It's actually a huge part. I misspoke. Yeah, Bill Street. And as an aside, I want to make a little digression here. When I heard that there was a movie coming out called If Bill Street Could Talk, I got so excited because I thought that's what the movie was going to be about. What this book here is about is where my mind went, okay? Because I thought they was just going to make a movie about Black culture in the earlier parts of the 20th century, where Beale Street was like a mecca, for black folks in the South, okay? And there was blues, there was juke joints, there was, revivals in the churches, all the eateries, all the vice that was going on, and yes, all the hoodoo, all right? I really thought that's what that movie was going to be about, and much to my disappointment, it had nothing to do with that at all. As a matter of fact, I was a little confused with that movie. I didn't dislike the movie, but it was just confusing. I don't know, maybe I have to see it again. But anyway, so yeah, there's a huge part of the history of Beale Street and how prominent it was in the black community of Memphis. It gets into the history of black communities in Memphis and around Memphis, in there. And that is just great, especially if you hail from Memphis or currently live there, okay, if you got family from there. As a child, I spent a lot of time in Memphis because we lived in Holly Springs, okay, Mississippi. So, it's a small town. So if you needed anything, we went grocery shopping for the most part, like our big weekly shopping after church, because sometimes we would go to church in Memphis. We would go shopping and, bring stuff back. But I, as a kid, if we had done anything with Beale Street, I don't remember it. All right. I don't think we did. And I really regret not spending more time on Beale Street last time I was in Memphis, which was last November when I went down south for Thanksgiving. We kind of rushed through Memphis, and I felt like we're forgetting something, because we just rushed home to make sure our chickens didn't die. But that's another story. Anyway, y'all, Hoodoo Culture is the second chapter. Conjure Life in Memphis is the third chapter. What was it like for black folks to practice hoodoo in Memphis in its heyday specifically? Now, this author does go back into the latter parts of the 19th century with some historical information, but most of it is focused on the 20th century, post-emancipation, all right? Because that's where you had these larger settlements of black folks in and around Memphis, okay? Because Memphis was on and popping. And I just recently made a post about Fair Street, which was similar to Beale Street, but in Jackson, Mississippi, which is where I was born and where all my family is for the most part. And, there's a lot of interest into restoring Fair Street back to its former glory. All right. So I'm going to keep my eyes on that. But that was just such a pleasure to read about. Okay. The next chapter 4 is the Wizards of Beale Street. And here's where he gives up some names, all right, to go along with who these hoodoo saints are, all right. And some of them were very, very credible. Some of these are people whose names I've heard before, all right, and a lot of them were people's names I've never heard of before. So again, if you have family from Memphis, if you currently live there, or you know for a fact that some of your people may have lived there, you owe it to yourself to read this, because you might be finding your own people, all right? You might find some information about your own family members, because he lists several, all right? So that was just great. The 5th chapter is the War on Hoodoo. And this chapter, man, I had so many mixed emotions reading that part. And he did such a great job at documenting the title of this chapter, War on Hoodoo, because guys, there was a whole ass war going on with the police and the authorities against hoodooists in Memphis. All right, it was all kind of shenanigans, people committing acts of murder, okay, charlatanism, crime, forgery. I mean, just all kind of fuck shit was going on. All right. Well, first of all, let me dial it back. And the author does a very good job at also illustrating how the larger white community felt about what these black folks were doing. All right. And there was a lot of ignorance, a lot of fear, and just all around outright disdain. And so when this war on hoodoo started, it was interesting to see, that the police and everybody, were trying to eradicate or stamp out what the workers were doing. Okay. But at the same time, they're saying how, this is superstitious. This is just backwards, stuff. These Negroes are just dumb and fantastical, and they're just Looney Tunes for believing stuff. There's no truth to any of this. So it kind of makes you ask the question, well, if it's not real and it doesn't have power to hurt or harm anyone or affect anyone, then why should it bother you? Right? So why have this campaign against hoodoo if it ain't shit? Because if it ain't shit, leave these folks alone. So there must have been some level of, no, this shit really is powerful. This shit really does work. And we have a good reason to be scared. Right? As white folks, we got a good reason to be afraid of it. So we got to get rid of it. So Tony does a great job at highlighting and illustrating and showing how this war on hoodoo was actually carried out. He brings all the receipts, y'all. Man, I mean, hoodoo was in the newspapers on the regular, okay? All these different crimes, so-called crimes and things that would happen, and the voodoo doctor or the hoodoo doctor would be blamed for it. And there was some really disturbing parts about that as well. I'm not even going to talk about them because they were disturbing and I'm very emotional and I will probably bust out crying if I mention them. But there were some really horrific parts that just kind of gutted me that were pertaining to, how these crimes were committed under the guise of hoodoo or voodoo. So that chapter was like, man, it was crazy. It was wild. I had no idea, that it was that prevalent to the point where it was in the regular news on almost a weekly basis. Okay. The next chapter is the marketplace of hoodoo. And this is a good chapter if you really want to understand what white folks mean when they keep bandying about the European influences of hoodoo. And I have a whole segment, podcast episode on what I believe are the European influences of hoodoo. And guess what? This author basically confirms and validates what I've been saying. When it comes to the European influences of hoodoo, it is the marketeering. That's it, and that's all. Okay? And what I also like is that he makes mention of workers, individual workers, not the whole hoodoo people, just these particular individuals who did a certain thing. But let me dial it back. The marketplace of hoodoo was basically ushered in with the Jewish-owned pharmacies, okay? Because hatred and discrimination against Jews in the early 20th century was very real. Jews could not be with Anglo-Saxon white folks, okay? They could not live with them. They could not have businesses in their neighborhoods. They couldn't do it. They had to stay segregated, but they offered services to the black neighborhoods because they knew black folks would not do that to them. Okay. So they owned and operated businesses like pharmacies and other types of goods in black neighborhoods. Right. And so as a result of that, because remember, African view of health has a physical component and a spiritual component. So naturally, if you're ailing from something physical, you're going to try to get the root work or the root doctrine done because you want to take care of the spiritual as well. So this wasn't lost on the Jewish pharmacies, all right? So they had to start catering to their clientele. They started asking questions. They started paying attention to what the black folks were asking about or describing or what they were looking for. Jews are good business people. All right, they're just not going to shut you down because they don't like you based on your race. They're trying to make their money, right? So being savvy businessmen, they listened and they learned and they started accommodating black folks with their hoodoo. All right. And the author Tony Kail, he also makes mention of some manufacturing companies that got started in Memphis that started making cosmetics because they saw a niche for black cosmetics for the black consumer. And then they also started selling hoodoo paraphernalia. All right. There's all these claims about, this is just, curio. It's just fun stuff, right? It's not really spiritually significant. And the kinds of things that they would sell, or, the lucky perfumes, the spiritual perfumes and things like that, the powders, the roots, the stones, lodestones in particular, and maybe a few oils and things. And, and that's where the introduction of other occultism started coming in. Now, what I really loved about this book is that the author highlights the treasure hunting pastime with hoodoo. I had never heard of that before, but it seems that a lot of hoodoo workers were creating hoodoo modalities specifically for treasure hunting. Okay, and there was a lot of really interesting stories associated with that, guys. You got to read this. It is very entertaining. But so in one of these stories that the author talks about, you're dealing with some hoodooists who utilize the seals of Solomon. Now, this is going into ceremonial magic and occultism, which is not a part of the West African paradigm or model of this work. Okay, so a lot of people who are just, clueless about how black folks really got down, they'll sit up here and say, well, that's the European influence of hoodoo working the seals. Well, first of all, everybody don't work them seals. Okay, so what I like is that the author, illustrates who exactly these people were and why they were doing what they did. So a lot of people make the mistake of reading certain stories about a small number of people, 1 or 2 or 3, in one specific part of the United States, in this case, Tennessee, all right, about what they did with something, and they'll paint the whole culture with that same wide brush. Okay, because if you talk to some elders down in Mississippi, you talk to some elders down in Georgia, you talk to the elders down in Alabama who still do this work, and you say what you do with them Solomon seals, they will not know what the fuck you're talking about. Okay? They won't. So folks need to really stop that mess by saying that this is hoodoo. It isn't. It's something that a specific group of individuals did, a specific time, in a specific place for a specific reason. Okay? That's it, and that's all. But it's really interesting stuff, guys. You got to read about that. So then, he just goes on to talk about the history of these companies and how they catered to their black clientele. Now, what I found was very interesting, because this is another piece of the history that confuses a lot of people and has them making assumptions or revisionist history about hoodoo. Okay, and that was the cosmetic companies and their marketing. Okay, because a lot of these folks were pharmacists and chemists, and so they did a lot of the actual creation of a lot of these cosmetic products and a lot of these hoodoo products. He makes mention of the Valmore company that was here in Chicago as well. Okay, remember I told you guys there was a very strong black hoodoo community in the 20th century right here in Chicago. A lot of them folks have passed on, and their younger generations didn't necessarily pick this up. Now, I know a few did. All right, they are still around. I don't know these individuals, but I will one of these days. Okay, but Valmore was one of the companies here, as well as the Lama Temple Candle Company. But anyway, getting back to Memphis, you had these companies marketing hoodoo because it was such a huge market for it amongst black folks. So they made it a point to advertise in black circulars, black newspapers such as Chicago Defender and other town, newspapers that catered to black communities. So what these companies did was kind of capitalize on the fact that anti-blackness was very prevalent. that looking white was the standard of beauty, right? White skin whitening was a thing. Hair straightening was a thing. Light-skinned black people were always elevated over darker skinned black people, so there was a lot of the colorism. So they kind of fed into that by putting non-black images of people on a lot of these cosmetics and on the hoodoo packaging as well. Okay, so you're seeing, Hindu, Indian people and gypsy this and that and, whatever the case. So that just kind of lends to the, this culture of colorism and anti-blackness that was going on, not so much perpetrated by the white folks on black folks, but perpetrated within the black community. So that's why you have this mindset, black people think, if it's white, it's all right. Right? If it's white, it's all right. And a lot of black folk, thinking, well, the white man ice is colder. So they'll take what a white man sells to them or tells them over what their own brothers and sisters will tell them about their own ancestral shit. Okay? And unfortunately, that mentality is very much alive and well today. I see it regularly. All right? But I'm just happy that more and more and more of us are outnumbering them. Okay? So that's something that I found very, very interesting. It kind of goes into great detail about these companies, about why they did what they did, and, how they thrive over the years. And so what you're seeing is the evolution of this work, okay? I don't have a problem with the evolution of it. I just like it when people kind of understand how it got to where it got, how it got to looking the way it looked, as you see it today. All right? Because it wasn't necessarily from us. It was, in fact, something that we adapted or kind of allowed in. All right? The next chapter is the sanctified churches and spiritual temple. Ooh, now that right there is a book all by itself, y'all. Man, I just made a post the other day about, just yesterday, I was finishing that chapter, and I was getting so emotional, because man, it just speaks to the strength and the audacity of survival that our ancestors have, that we have. Okay? Because when you read about all the resistance to African spirituality from slavery on up until now even, and you see black folks are still going to do what they do. They're still going to move the way the spirit moves them unapologetically. Okay? And it just, man, it had me feeling so emotional. I'm just like, man, listen. Black folk just cannot be outdone. We just can't. All right? But that chapter is worth the cost of the book to me. All right? I mean, and I already told you how good the rest of the chapters are. But that chapter to me, because of my interest, all right, in reestablishing the spiritual tradition back to its rightful place, you know what I'm saying? And what that might look like, how can we build, and what are we building off of exactly? Well, that's where this chapter is worth the whole cost of the book to me, okay, because of what my interests are. And again, you'll see a lot of mention, including photographs of a lot of our blessed hoodoo saints, all right? And then finally, you have the last chapter, chapter 8, called The Future, where the author actually sat down with some modern root workers, okay, some elders of tradition. So he conducts his own interviews with culture bearers of tradition, all right? And it just doesn't get any better than that. This is one of the reasons I could not review or recommend the book before, all right? Because it's written by, an outsider of tradition who puts this insider spin on what he's calling hoodoo, And he makes mention of other people, his friends and colleagues, who themselves are not even culture bearers of this tradition. All right? There's no interviews in that book. There's no black people in that book. Not at all. And so it just loses its validity in my eyes, and therefore I cannot recommend it to you guys. But this book here, he went straight to the horse's mouth. This author does not practice hoodoo that I'm aware of. If he does, he didn't write about it, and he didn't posit himself in that way. All right? But he puts the focus on the people. He puts the focus on our ancestors. He puts the focus on our history without trying to insert or center himself as a European person. You understand? So that is why I give this book 10 out of 10. All right? 10 out of 10. Get it now. It's available on Amazon.com. Get it now if you are interested in the history of the Hoodoo people, all right, the Hoodoo culture, black spirituality, who our Hoodoo saints are, how things got to be the way that they look today as far as what so-called Hoodoo magic looks like, okay? Understand how the transition occurred and why, all right? So that is going to wrap up my review of this book, all right? A Secret History of Memphis Hoodoo by author Tony, Tony Kail, Kail. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you have any comments or questions, you can reach out to me on my social media. I'm at Mamaru HH on Twitter, Mamaru HH on Instagram, me and Wilson on Facebook for now. And you can find me at contact@mamaru.com. That's my email, or you can go to my website, mamaru.com, hit the contact button, and send a message that way. I want to give another shout out to all my new listeners and new followers on social media, but I'd like to give you one little caveat. Please do not jump into my inbox or my DMs or send me emails wanting me to give you what I've already been giving you, either on my social media or on this podcast. All right. Anybody asking me questions that I've already discussed on my podcast, you need to just listen. All right. And now, if you insist on wanting to speak to me about things I've already talked about, or if you want me to go into more detail, you can hit me up with a consultation on my website. Just go to mamaru.com and hit that shop button and purchase a consultation. All right. And we can talk for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. All right. So that's what I have to say about that. And if you like this podcast, and also you've been benefiting from it, as well as what I share on my social media about hoodoo, support it. All right. Cash App Mama Ru some coinage. $ Mama Ru is the Cash App code. All right. This is my birthday month. So yeah, I'm going to be putting that out there. It's my birthday. Make it rain on Mama Ru. All right. So yes, if you support what I've been giving you, you like it, show me some love, send a love offering, Cash App Mama Ru, or cashmamaru.com. All right. Or just do it for my birthday, because it's my birthday and it's my mama's birthday too. Yeah, our birthdays are 10 days apart from each other. And it's Mama Josie's birthday too. That's my mama's mama. Her birthday is the day before mine. So show us all some love, because they all had a hand in what you're hearing right now, which is my voice. Okay? So that's it for today, you all. I'm going to love you and leave you. But as always, I'm wishing you love, peace, and powerful juju. Take care, everybody.